Welcome to this workshop on managing requirements using MapleMBSE and the Capella Requirements Viewpoint Add-on. So I'm Varani Mohan. I'm the product manager for MapleMBSE. I've been with MapleSoft for about 3 years, mainly working with engaging with customers to identify their problems in MBSE and including those features into MapleMBSE to enhance their MBSE process and to effectively use MapleMBSE in their MBSE process. So in today's session, what we will see is I'll give you a short introduction to what MapleMBSE is and what it is about. Then we will get into the requirements management. We will see how you can manage requirements in MapleMBSE with the Capella and the requirements add-on. We will see a workflow demo where I'll use MapleMBSE to connect to the Capella model. We will acquire some requirements from the model, and we will see how we can include relations and what kind of informations we could add to the requirement and so on. And I'll also discuss few more use cases with MapleMBSE, and we will wrap up today's session. And if you have any question, feel free to use the chat window. In the Zoom, you'll have a chat option. You can type in your questions, or you can unmute yourself and ask me the questions directly. So what MapleMBSE's goal is, like what it is trying to do, is it is trying to connect all the different aspects of system engineering. So you're going to, in your MBSE process, you're going to have like different stakeholders who has to involve and then contribute to the system model. So you'll have different stakeholders who are not familiar with the modeling tool or the modeling environment, but you still need their expertise to be captured into the model in the right format. So what MapleMBSE can do is MapleMBSE can bridge this gap. It will accelerate the introduction of MBSE in your enterprise because they are going to use with an interface that is very familiar to them. So they need less training. And since it's a view that is familiar for them, you will have the friction. You will have no friction to engage them into the MBSE process. This also enables the cross-discipline collaboration. Like you can involve different stakeholders who has no information, who has information about the system model that you want to capture, but they do not have the appropriate knowledge to work with the modeling tool or the modeling language and so on. And it also helps in reducing the risk of project. So because you capture the information from the user in the right format, for example, say even requirements, you can capture the requirements, you can link the requirements to different elements and so on. So since all this is captured in a well-structured format, you reduce the risk of projects and the cost of running over and etc. So how MapleMBSE is able to achieve this is MapleMBSE maintains a bidirectional connection between the system model to the interface that we are going to connect to the model. So in our case, what we are going to do is we are going to use Excel to connect to the system model, and it's going to get the information from the system model and display it in Excel. MapleMBSE is not doing an export and an import of information. It always maintains a bidirectional synchronization between the views that you're going to see in Excel and the system model. So every time the user updates or edits an information through the Excel, they are interacting with the system model on the background. And we have standard interfaces to different modeling tools like Cameo, Capella Rhapsody, and so on. And some of the typical use cases that you can achieve with MapleMBSE is, for example, you can create a different views for interface control. You can create a view for trade-off analysis, then safety analysis if you want to do, say, rapid integration of large information, or if you want to do a safety analysis, functional decomposition, like if you want to do functional decomposition with different architecture levels in Capella and so on. So basically, this is what MapleMBSE has to offer. So it offers a connection between stakeholders who has to contribute to the system model but are not familiar with the modeling environment. And MapleMBSE can bridge this gap. So in terms of requirements management, as you already know, managing requirements is important. So the scope of this workshop, we will not go into the details of what perfect requirement is, how the requirement has to be consistent, and so on. So the aspect that we will get into today is we already have the requirements. You have the requirements, say, either from your standard requirement tools, or if you have it from your documents like the technical requirement document or system requirement document and so on. We are only going to see the aspect of capturing this requirements, adding these requirements into the Capella model. As a user, you can add new requirement, but we will not go into detail of how to write a requirement and so on. So these are kind of guided by the INCOSI. So if you use the Guide for Writing Requirements or the NASA System Engineering Handbook, they are going to guide you to write a perfect requirement. So we want to write a good requirement that is complete, which is consistent, and it conveys the information to the stakeholder and so on. But for the scope of this workshop, what we will do is we will restrict it where you have the requirements already and you want to incorporate this requirement into a system model. And for the demo that we are going to do, what we will do is we will consider the system, which is a lunar relay satellite. So this is an extract that I got from the lunar relay satellite, which is available publicly. Let's consider some requirements. Like, so you want to, for any system, you want to include certain kind of requirements in, and you want to relate these requirements into the model. So it could be because of requirements could be on the level of, say, very high level. So initially you start with the high level, you break down the requirements into other granularities and so on. So as a high level, let's say you want to have certain restriction for the power usage, mass allocation or connectivity and so on. And what we want to do with the high level requirement is we want to break it down further into much more formal to add the requirements, which is much more flexible for you to link the requirements with each other. You want to be able to link the requirement to different model elements. You want to maintain that traceability. So this is the main idea behind why we want to do the requirements management. We want to get into more detail, like being more clear on for the power usage example. Even during an eclipse for the LRS, which is the lunar relay satellite, it should be able to have a backup power for at least 2.5 hours, or the maximum mass allocation that for growth should be less than 15%, or the peak offer load during the connectivity, the user should be able to download information at least 100 megabytes per second from the LCT, which is the lunar communication terminal and so on. So from the high level requirements, you get to more specific and more clear, concise requirements. And you also want to be able to link all these requirements with, say, if this requirement is being derived from another requirement. For example, the connectivity requirement, which is on the high level, it is just to connect the terminal, like the communication terminal, to the surface user. But from this connectivity, you can derive like this should be the download speed, this should be the upload speed between the surface user and the LCT and so on. So this is kind of derived from the high level requirement. And once you break down the requirement, or once you refine the requirements, you want to link it to different components that you're going to add to the system model, or different functions that is going to kind of meet these requirements. And you want to link the requirement to the element using, you could create your own custom link, or like standard relations, like if you want to call it as a satisfied relation that this specific requirement has been met by this component. Or if you want to create like a test cases where the test case is going to verify the requirement that's inside. And we need to kind of trace all this back to the document or the requirements document or the high level artifact from which we kind of derived all the requirements. So this is what we want to do overall with the requirements management. And when you're using, say, Capella with the requirements add-on, you could have one of the two process that I'm going to discuss now. Imagine that you are using the process where you already have Capella with the requirements add-on, and the requirements add-on will allow you to import the requirements in the standard recif format. And we have imported it. You have already defined the different types for the requirement, what attributes that the user should add to the requirement, and so on. So you have kind of already defined all this. And now what you would like to do is you want to expose this information to a user who is not familiar with the modeling tool. So what MapleMBSE can do is at this point, MapleMBSE will be able to access the information based on the requirements type. So this requirement type that you see here on the right side, this is something that I have defined for the model, but you would have defined your own field, you would have defined your own attributes that the requirement should have, and you want the user to kind of fill in these attributes to make the requirements complete. You want these requirements to be linked to different model elements and so on. But for an end user who's not familiar, say, with the modeling tool, they could just launch MapleMBSE. They will connect to the model, and based on the types and the requirements, you will be able to see this information as tables and matrices in MapleMBSE. So you can see requirements as a list. You will be able to see what each requirement is related to. Like if a requirement is related to a physical component, or if it's related to a function, and so on. And you can also import new requirements, set new types for the requirements based on the definitions or the custom types that you have defined in your Capella model. And this kind of now becomes synchronized because the system engineer who's going to continue with the Capella tool, they are going to add new requirements or make some changes to the types and so on. And this will always be synchronized with the MBSE user. So the user who's going to interact to the model using MapleMBSE, they will always get the updated changes. They will always get the updated requirement. And once they make some changes from MapleMBSE and save it back to the model, we always maintain the synchronization between the modeling tool and MapleMBSE. So say this is kind of the one workflow. Imagine in another case where you have the requirements add-on. So this could be a new project, or if you're starting to implement your MBSE process and would like to say get information from standard requirements documents, or if you have a standard requirements tool, you have defined your types already. You have the Capella with the requirements add-on. You can easily, based on the template that you already defined, you can easily bring in requirements as an Excel import into MapleMBSE. So you import new requirements, and MapleMBSE will automatically create all these requirements based on like the type, what kind of requirements that you want to add to the model, and what kind of relations you want to create between a requirement that you just added to the model and a component or a physical component or a physical function that already exists in the model. You'll be able to create all these links between the requirement and the Capella model elements. And even types. Imagine if you have already used the requirements add-on, you know that if you import a long list of requirements and if you have to set a type, it's very hard for you to set the type because you have to do it for each requirement. Or maybe the other practice would be like you already set a blank requirement with a type. You have to copy paste it each time. So if you have 1,000 requirements, you have to copy paste it 1,000 times. Or if you say import 1,000 requirements into the model, and if you want to set type, you have to click 1,000 times on the requirements, and you have to select the type for the requirement so that you will be able to use all the predefined types you have defined. But with MapleMBSE, you will be able to just drag and drop it. Probably you'll be able to set types in maybe 10-15 seconds. for 1,000 requirements easily. So you can see like how flexible and how easy it becomes, even for a system engineer to interact with MapleMBSE to manage the requirements. And the best thing is you're not fixed to the views that you are going to see here in today's workshop. All the views that for the requirements, they are completely customizable. You'll be able to tailor it to different requirement types, different modeling practices that you have, and so on. And for when you're doing the same process with MapleMBSE, they are going to be reflected as the Capella elements itself. So there is no change if you compare between when you import the requirements add-on to directly to Capella, you work on Capella, you get the information in MapleMBSE, you change it, you save it back, or if you directly use MapleMBSE to bring the information in, because this is more on the end user side who is not familiar with the modeling environment. So you import the information, you create all the relations and so on, and this is going to be captured in the right format. Because say for an end user, you're not going to be familiar with like what kind of relations that you have to create between a requirement and a modeling model element, or what kind of relation should be created between two requirement and so on. And all this complexity is managed within MapleMBSE. So the end user, they don't need to worry about if they have to set a type for the requirement. I would have already defined it in MapleMBSE, and the user will just add a new requirement, and the type will always by default set to that requirement type. And if you want to create a certain relation between a requirement and a model element, again, I would have already defined this relation should be a verified relation, or this relation should be a satisfied relation. So the user doesn't need to worry about like creating a relation, then going back into Capella, then setting the relation to be either satisfied or verified. I would have already defined everything here in MapleMBSE template. And the user will just launch, create a relation and the right relation, and it will be created at the right place in the Capella model. So we will completely see all these workflow in the following session. And for the workflow, what I have done is, so I have created a custom type for the requirement. So I have created a requirement type with Boolean and string. I have included also one attribute for the requirement status. So I want the user to select, once they add a new requirement to the model, I want the user to select if the requirement status is pending or reviewed. So I have used the enumeration attribute from the requirements add-on for this. And for the requirements itself, the user is going to create a new requirement, set the requirement type as this, so that they will be able to use these attributes that we defined here, like adding a description, ID, and the requirement status. And when I also want the user to say, link the requirement with the model element, and I want these link to be either verified. So that's why I define the type of relation to be verified by. So for the workflow, what we are going to see is I'm going to launch MapleMBSE. We are going to select the Capella model and then start editing in MapleMBSE. And once we save, we will be able to see the synchronization between how the information that we edited, what new information that we included in MapleMBSE is captured in directly in the Capella model. So for the process of editing, what I will do is I'll import new requirement to the model. So I already have a list of requirements that's defined in the model, but what we will do is we will include new requirements. Then we will include type for the requirement and link these newly added requirement to some of the model element. And then what we will do is we will also introduce a new test case, and I want to be able to say that this specific test case is going to verify a requirement, and we will again see how all these changes are being reflected in Capella. So here I have the MapleMBSE template file. So we call this as a configuration file. So this is going to have all the information about the model that we want to open in MapleMBSE. It is going to get the information, and based on how I have defined the template, we are going to see different views being shown in Excel. So when you launch the configuration file, MapleMBSE will automatically bring in an Excel worksheet. And once it brings the Excel worksheet, it is going to ask you to select the model that you want to open in MapleMBSE. And once you select the model, we'll be able to see that MapleMBSE will capture the information from the model elements and add it on to the Excel view. So the model that we are going to select is directly the Capella file. So I have included a new example. So for the workshop, I have called it as communication system. When you click on open, you select the Capella file directly. You click open, and this is going to open all the information from the model in MapleMBSE. So here you can see I have different worksheets. So each worksheet is a view into the Capella model. So before I say start editing or start showing the different views, I have opened the same model in Capella. So here you can see that we have the Capella model called as the communication system. It is not required that the user has to run Capella simultaneously when they are using MapleMBSE. I'm just using it to show you the workflow between say two users, but it's not necessary. Like when you use MapleMBSE, the Capella instance should also be running. So like I mentioned to you before, we have some custom requirements type defined. So for the requirements type, I have certain attributes like the requirement status, pending reviewed. I want to add new requirements. The type of the requirement should be requirement, and then the relations that I'm going to give, like the relation type, is going to be a satisfy relation. And I already have a list of requirements that inside the requirements module for the lunar relay satellite. And you can also see the relation that already exists in the model. So here, this is just a list of requirements. You can see that there are already certain relations. You have some requirements which is related to the physical components using a satisfy relation. And the requirement itself, it has a name, it has certain text and fields assigned to it. So you will be able to see the same information here through MapleMBSE. And this is just an introduction worksheet that I have included. So each worksheet, what each worksheet conveys to the user, like for example, the import worksheet, the user can use this to import new requirements into the model and so on. So the requirements import worksheet, this one will show the requirement that already exists in the model, and the user can use this view to again import new requirements into the model. This worksheet is to show again the list of requirements, what are the types for the requirements that has been assigned, and you can also see the requirement allocation, like the source and the target to which the requirement is assigned to. For example, this requirement is assigned to the KA band. This is information where you are seeing it as a flat list in a table format. You can also convey the same information here as a matrix. So here you are able to again see the list of all the requirements. I have used just the Excel grouping to hide the requirement text. And you can see that this, for example, the DSN LCT is linked to the DT transponder physical component. So you can convey all the information that you would expect to expose to the user. So you're seeing here the requirements name and the ID. The requirements text. So here on the column, you're seeing the physical components. And the X in the intersecting cell, they represent that there is an satisfy relation between this requirement here, like for example, the SUDFB with the coax switch. And you will be able to notice the same if you compare it with what you see here in Capella. So you can see For example, the SA band relay link is related to the LSSM system. So here, similarly, you can see the SA band relay link is being related to the LSSM, so which is the structure and the mechanical system, and so on. So between these three worksheets, we'll start working initially. So what I will do now is, based on the workflow that we already saw, I'm going to import new requirement to the model. So I have a list of requirements here. We have up to, say, R28. So there is a list of requirements from 1 to 28. I'm going to include new requirements here into the model. So for that, you can see new ribbon called as Addons. So when you click on Addons, you have a menu for MapleMBSE. I'm going to use the import. So once you click on import, it is going to ask you the sheet that you want to import to. And I'm going to click on import sheet, which is going to get new requirements that's already defined in the Excel worksheet. So here you can see the import sheet that we are going to import. I only have a list of requirements from R29 to R35. So once the import is done, MapleMBSE will also let you know like how many new requirements or new rows were included, and how many were updated, and so on. So now you can see we have included those 7 new requirements here. New requirements are being added here, and this is going to be consistent in all the other worksheets too. You'll be able to see all the requirements that have been imported. And at this point, I have not actually included any type for the requirement. So you can see that all the requirements that were previously here, they are the type as requirement, but the new requirements that we imported, they are missing the requirements field. I could just drag and drop the type here, and you can see how easy it is. For you to do the same in Capella, you need to select the requirement, then you need to select the type of requirement for each, and so on. But here you saw how easy it was for the user to just add the information for the requirement and type, and so on. So now what I'll do is I'll just save this part of the change to the model. Like I have included a few requirements and assigned a type. And you can see, since I have not saved to the model, you can see that we do not have the new requirement that's being listed. We only have all the requirements for the LRS. There is no new requirement for the structure and the mechanical system. So to save my changes to Capella, I'm going to just click on the save button. And in Capella, I'm going to refresh my model to get the latest changes. So now here you can notice that these requirements for the SMM, they were being added recently. And if I check the requirement type, you would be able to see that they all been assigned the type of requirements here. And the workflow, say, between Capella to MapleMBSE is also going to be consistent. For example, say the system engineer reviews these changes, he is going to make some change to some of the requirements and save it back to the model. The user from MapleMBSE will be able to get those changes in the same way as how we saw the workflow between MapleMBSE to Capella. So say, for example, I am going to probably say rename the SMDD. Let's take SM, and I'm going to just rename this to a different name, and I'm going to save this to the model. And we'll be able to see these changes reflected once I update my model here in MapleMBSE. So here you can see the changes that we did from Capella is being reflected in MapleMBSE. So now what we will do is, so we have included new requirements to the model using import. User will also be able to add new requirements directly by adding a requirement name, the text, and so on. For example, let's say I want to create an wait, I'm going to call this as 36. Let's say the SW maximum, let's say folder, something like that, or 40K. Okay, so this is how a user can include new requirement directly to the model if you're not using the import feature. And again, you can set the requirement type. It's easy. You can just click on the requirements and you're going to add a new type. So now what we will do is we will include a new relation to the requirements in the model. So what we will do is we will include a new relation between one of the requirement that we just imported and one of the component that's already in the model. So this view, what it conveys is, so I have all the requirements being listed here, and I also have some of the physical components being listed. So what I want from the user is, I want the user to add new requirement, and I want them to make a relation between the requirement to one of the physical component that is going to satisfy that relation. So that is the goal of this worksheet. So here, that's why you are seeing the requirement being listed here. What relation, like how it is going, the requirement is going to be related to a physical component and so on. So let's take one of the requirements that we just imported. For example, let's take the SMLV. So I want to link the requirement SMLV to, let's say, the coax switch. So either I could use the matrix or I could use the components that's being listed. And I'm going to add something called S-band coax switch. So this, you can see that initially the error that was notifying to the user that the information is missing has been removed. And now this row is being accepted. You can see that they are consistent with the other rows. So this means that this row or this information is accepted by MapleMBSE. So I can just click on the save button, and here, if I refresh the model, we will be able to see the new changes that are being reflected. So we added the new relation for the SMLV. Nice vibration, and you can see from the requirement allocation, it is allocated to the S-band coax switch. And you can also notice that by default, it has the requirement or the relation type as satisfied. So this is how you will be able to include a new relation to relate between the requirements that you imported and the component that's already in Capella. So this could be between different model elements. So you'll be able to relate requirements to, let's say, physical function, logical function, or like the ports and etc. But for this specific view, what I have done is I have related the requirements only to physical component. So here, this is the requirement status table where I want the user to select the requirement and assign a status for it. So you can see that based on the other requirements that's already in the model, we are seeing the status as pending or reviewed and so on. And let's say we will continue working with the same requirement, which is the SMLV. So for the requirement SMLV, what I will do is I'm going to just include status as reviewed. So when I include reviewed, you can see that this row is now updated, and this is an accepted information, and the review status has been changed to reviewed. So the next worksheet is where you can use to include new test cases to verify the requirement. So here you can see that there is already certain relations that comes in, like from the test case. I have the test case name, the steps for the test case, some comments or results based on the test case, and finally the source and the target that I want to relate the test case to. So I want to relate the test case to certain requirement and so on to have a verified relation. So to create a new test case, again, it is pretty simple. We're going to give an ID. Let's say this is a test case for the same requirement, SMLV. Let's say this is a test case for SMLV. And you can include steps to test. I'll just use integration test. And you can include further steps. And what I will do now is I want to connect this test case to requirement. So let's connect this test case. With the requirement called SMLV. So we have now created a new relation to verify. So one thing you can notice here is in the requirements, we created a new requirement, assigned a type for the requirement. But with the test case aspect, we just created test case for here. Then we started to directly create new relations and so on. If you notice, before for the test case too, we have included like what the type of the test case should be and what kind of relation the test case has to create. So the difference between these worksheet is even though like on the background, they both are requirements. One is being assigned as a type as requirement, the other is being assigned as a test case. But in this specific view, I am not giving the user the complexity of again choosing the type. I have defined the template in such a way that the user enters a test case. By default, it is going to be assigned the type as a test case itself. So I'll save it through the model now. We will refresh and we will see how the type and the relations are being automatically assigned to it based on the template. So here, this is the new test case that we created. You can see the type to be the test case. By default, whenever a user adds new test case through this specific view, I'm going to include it as a test case type. And this is also going to have a relation. You can see that there are some internal relation which has the relation type as verified, and it links to the requirement called the SM shall minimize vibration. So you can again see that between handling same elements, how different you can customize your views and how correctly you will be able to capture the information and set into the model. So the final worksheet is just to show the list of requirements that has not been allocated to a physical component. So with MapleMBSE, you can also create different views in which you will be able to query the model information. So for example, you can query the model to get the list of requirements, same as in this case, to display the requirements that is not allocated to any physical components. So in any requirement that is already allocated will not be shown here. For example, we link the SMLV, so you can notice that that specific requirement will not be shown here as a physical. Okay, so here you'll be able to see again the same relations as diagrams itself. For example, if I bring in the new requirement here onto the Capella diagram, we included the one for vibration. So you can see the diagram will be populated with the right information. We link the SMLV requirement with the satisfied relation to the SA band coax switch. And then we also created a verified relation between the test case for the SMLV with the requirement. So you are able to see that we are able to rightly capture the information as we want into the Capella model. So this kind of concludes the workflow that we wanted to explore today. Like we saw how to import the requirement. We added new types. We linked it to model element, and then we created a new test case. We linked the imported requirement to the test case, and we saw how this is being reflected in Capella. So the other use cases that you can explore using MapleMBSE is you already saw how easy it was to import requirements into the model. So you could customize the template in such a way that you define all the fields, you will define all the types for the requirement you want, and you could do an import and you'll be able to create hundreds and thousands of requirements in a much quicker format when you compare working with the tool there. And then you will be also able to create different views, like you'll be able to create different table views, the matrices views to link the requirement to different Capella elements, like the functions. You can also find, for example, link requirement to be verified by a functional chain or functions and so on. And like the last worksheet that we discussed, you'll be able to query the model to find information about certain requirements that matches your query criteria. Like you could search the old model to find requirement that is assigned with a certain enumeration type. Like for example, you can get a list of requirement that has the status as pending. Or you can say if you want to list requirements with multiple enumeration values, like for example, you want to list all the requirements which has status either that is not pending or reviewed. So any requirement that has no status defined, you'll be able to kind of use the and or and operations to query the model elements and bring the results in MapleMBSE. And you also saw that we can easily capture the contribution from the stakeholders in a structured format. You can capture the requirements. You will be able to link the new requirements from MapleMBSE to the model element that already exists in Capella. So as a summary, you already were able to see that how easy it would be for subject matter experts who's not familiar with the modeling tool to engage into the MBSE process using MapleMBSE. They can just launch MapleMBSE, select the model they want to work with. So for today's session, we specifically saw how to work with the requirements, how to add new types to the requirements, how to link requirements, and so on. But you can kind of adopt this to any architecture level in Capella and to any model element. And you also saw that it is very easy to, even for a system engineer, to manage requirements using the views that they see with MapleMBSE. And the best thing is you'll be able to configure and tailor it to your different modeling practices. If you have your own custom requirement types and so on, you'll be able to modify MapleMBSE and configure it to fit based on that specific project or your practice and so on.